This is something that actually I think it was Faxi brought it up. He said somebody he knew got a survey or whatever, and this was a question that was on the survey. Wowhead has now latched on this topic. I was actually going to make a video on this earlier in the week, but I didn't know that there would be enough discussion on it. But I'm really glad that Wowhead did make this article because now we can piggyback off their discussion. And the whole point of me making this video is to hear your guys' thoughts on it because I really don't have a lot of thoughts on it. I don't, for years I've always said that it's non-negotiable that the debts or that the timer will always exist because that is what Mythic Plus is. Now, just like when people ask for no fixes, I think, it's inevitable that there is something that constrains you. So, there was never going to be no fixes ever. Like I said, that's just part of the system. That's how it works. And it's the same way with the timer. So I was wrong in the way that I said that the timer will always exist, but I may still be right in the way that there will always be a constraint on the dungeon, that you can't just mess around and do nothing, for hours on end and still succeed in the key. So, but it will look very different if they do get rid of a timer and, they use deaths instead. So let's see what the Wowhead article has to say, and then, we'll give my reaction to it. But I really like to hear your guy, basically the end of the video right here, 1 minute in, just leave your thoughts on whether or not you like this or not. And do you think it would be better or worse? We're going to read what Wowhead says, and then I'll give my thoughts on it afterwards. But yeah, this is a common thing. I've never received these surveys. I got one once, and it was mostly just like a generic World of Warcraft survey. It was asking about a bunch of questions about Classic. One of the things that it asked me at that time was whether or not I thought GDKP was bad for the game, and I definitely said yes. So good. Changes come from these, is my point. Anyway, we received multiple reports from players receiving a Blizzard survey asking for feedback. One question that stuck out is, how interested would you be in Mythic Plus dungeons utilizing a death limit similar to Delves instead of a timer? Now, I have seen a lot of people suggest this on my videos, and I think there's pretty clear downsides to it. So I'm actually surprised to hear Blizzard mention it, which makes me think they probably have a different idea. And maybe if this is going to come, it could come on the back of the solo queue concept, which I do still believe is in the works. Because it would make a lot more sense in the solo queue. So let's see what Wowhead says. Currently, the Mythic Plus system depletes a key when the timer runs out. In addition, the timer can be lowered further by additional deaths by Challenger's Peril. The question seems to be proposing a world where Mythic Plus key is limited by the total of deaths in a key with no overall timer. If you've done Delves, you know that there's a limit of only 5 deaths in the Delves before you lose the Bountiful Chest at the end. The system proposed would be to work similar to this. So it's actually very interesting because honestly, at first I was like, this is ridiculous. It's not going to happen, right? But honestly, because of the Challenger's Peril change, it's already kind of both, isn't it? Like, it is limited to time and deaths because the deaths take time off. This is a really stupid idea, if you ask me. I don't know why it has to be both. So it's actually probably better for them to just do one. And I think they probably should just do the peril or just do the deaths. It's actually interesting because if you asked me a year ago, I would have said, it's ridiculous to have no timer, but you basically have both right now. So if there is no timer and it's only based on deaths, now, okay, so let's see what WoW had to say and then I'll give more thoughts, but there's some big issues with this in my eyes. Some of the initial reactions have been mixed, with certain players really not wanting this change, while other players are okay with this and have wanted to get rid of the timer in any way possible. And see, that's the scary part, because I think there's a lot of people desperately trying to get rid of the timer. But I think this would be harder. I really do. I really do, because, again, let's just keep reading. I have so many things to say about this, though. For players against removing the time limit, the main reason focuses on stagnant or boring gameplay, which is definitely going to happen. 100% going to happen. People did this in Torghast when Torghast was considered, hard content at the very beginning of Shadowlands. This is all three things that people would do, okay? So waiting for cooldowns. This is the number one. Similar to early, they literally said it. Similar to early Torghast with no death timers, players may be incentivized to wait for cooldowns between each pack. Yeah. So if you're thinking about timers being a problem, well, think about why they aren't a problem. Because it means quick keys. Like, you sign up to something, you're in and out 30 minutes. If you have to wait for cooldowns for every pack and nobody's willing to do anything without cooldowns, then we're talking about at least an hour. Like, you're not going to be spending less than an hour in any dungeon. Every dungeon will be at least an hour. Now, there's ways they can work around this. It could mean they can make a system where, like, cooldowns only can be used at certain times and they are not on a timer anymore, or the timer of them only depreciates or appreciates, whichever you would think, when you're in combat. They can make changes like that to the game physically, but will they make it for the regular Mythic Plus system? No. That's why I don't think they're going to do this for anything other than a solo queue type system. Now, their second point is players would be likely to be more adverse to any deaths leading to a smaller, low-risk pools that may focus on increased CC similar to Classic. Oh, okay, that's not what I thought they were going to say. That's very interesting, actually. I don't think that would be a bad thing. That's definitely not something I was thinking of when I read that bullet point. I thought what they meant was they would just not even try some keys because you know that the dungeons are imbalanced. And I think that's a really, really big issue. Like right now, a big point of imbalance is the timers, right? So if you do a Dawnbreaker, you know that Dawnbreaker's timer is extremely easy. So you can have dozens of deaths and still potentially upgrade it, especially at lower key levels. But the problem with Dawnbreaker, if you switch it from a timer to a death thing, is there's dozens of deaths in the dungeon. It actually becomes one of the harder dungeons, presumably. So, and there's a lot of it is just to mini bosses, right? There's 3 mini bosses and 3 actual bosses that all kill people constantly. And I think it would be very, very kind of toxic. People use this word a little bit too frivolously, but it would create very heavy arguments in the dungeon about how to do parts of the dungeon, because the mini bosses would be so dangerous that I think like you would really have a big focus on not dying to those, because then the trash would be like 0. You would have 0 way to potentially, work around it if you lost all your deaths to the mini boss or something. But yeah, and then the third one, definitely toxicity from accidental deaths. Currently, deaths and even full wipes can be overcome with higher damage, right? And this is the thing. You could easily make up for difficulty of Mythic Plus with damage. You cannot, this is a bad idea. I really hate to say it. This is really just not a good idea. And I'll give my full thoughts. I have so much to say. Mistakes do happen even to the most savvy of players, but these accidental deaths could lead to key failure under a death limit. With each death being more heavily scrutinized, it will lead to more toxicity in keys. Yeah, it will. And that's just, there's nothing really to elaborate on. That's obviously going to be the case. But this already happens because of the timer being removed by deaths, right? So it's true that you can overcome it. But the bigger point is that you can't really overcome deaths. Okay, so we'll talk about that in a second. Players for the death limit, players for, like in favor of, cite the benefits of reduced stress and risky gameplay caused by the timers, as well as breaking often rigid composition metas. So you'd have flexibility and reduced stress. No longer being in the clock relieves a lot of stress from Mythic Plus environment, allowing players, especially tanks, the time to plan their next pull, or even step away for a quick minute when real life demands. The real life stuff, that could be a big reason to not want a timer, but the other stuff is nonsense. Like, if the dungeon's going to take over an hour anyway, you're not going to be like trying to plan in the middle of the dungeon. You'd still try to do it fast. You would just not be risky. And it would slow everything down to a point where it might become stressful because you're kind of pulling one pack at a time, fighting one mob at a time, and you're waiting and waiting and waiting to see if everybody gets through it, I don't think this would actually be reduced stress. I think it would be a different kind of stress, where it would be a low stress but extremely high stress environment when somebody makes a mistake, because you would be expecting to go like perfect. You would expect perfection, right? It would be one of those situations. And then when there isn't perfection, you would not, like, everybody would get really agitated. Anyway, execution and not speed would be another point for their case. A renewed focus on execution allows even the most under-geared group to slowly and methodically conquer a dungeon, avoiding having to learn risky skips just to keep up. The most under-geared group, that's a weird thing to bring up. You would not be bringing under-geared people under this circumstance. That's one thing I definitely want to talk about. Break the meta. Currently, damage is a primary concern with rigid compositions catering to the strategy, often excluding some classes altogether. Death limits offer an alternative when survivability and dedicated healing are highly valued. CC and defensive utility becomes a potentially large factor, and composition and gearing alternatives open up. Okay, so these are not good points, by the way. That's the best 3 points you can make for having a death limit be the thing. So let me give my thoughts on this, because this is a bad idea. It's really a bad idea, to be honest, but I think they may do it. And this is what I see it looking like in this world of Mythic Plus, okay? So number one thing is that everybody's going to be waiting on cooldowns. Think about it now, right? You talk about the Wowhead article is talking about it from the perspective of somebody who is trying to succeed in Mythic Plus, and they're trying to upgrade every key they do or something like that, and that's great. But your average pug like fucking does not care about that. You can tell by the way that they play the game. They simply only care about maximizing their DPS. So if you're not going to be pulling large and the like meta is going to be pulling very small as possible, maybe even CCing, then nobody's going to like you pulled without my cooldown being up. That's not, you know what I mean? Like think about that. You've flipped the script now where it's like you're not planning my you're planning your route around my CDs, bro. That's gone. And now instead we have you're not gonna wait for my CDs. Like think about the umbrage of these. Like I could see it like just people screaming over this shit. So this is going to be very, very bad for any actual pug setting. Like, I think this might be the death of pugging Mythic Plus because the only reason that you really get by in the pug world at times is because you have really good damage. And, you know, you can have a lot of mistakes and people can make those mistakes and still overcome them. So right now in the pug world, it's common where like, you know, you have a mediocre group that kind of gets by because you have some really big damage from the people who are trying to work on that. And then, you know, the rest doesn't even matter. But in a world where you need perfection and you can't have deaths, the biggest issue they talked about it where deaths and even full wipes can be overcome with higher damage. You can outgear a dungeon. You cannot outscale a mechanic that kills you. Like there's nothing you can do about that. You can't gem for stamina. I mean, like, well, you can technically, but nobody ever does it. And so that's a bigger topic because like how do you balance the game in a way that the dungeons are equal? Like already we have wildly different and unfairly different timers in some dungeons, and it's gotten better, but it was really bad somewhat recently. It's like a year ago, it was really really bad. And now if everything's expected to be lived, like I guess another question you have is like how many deaths is the limit? Like what would you guys want to see as the limit? I would think 20, but maybe 15, maybe 10. It's probably going to be an even number. Now, I think something that's not discussed here that Blizzard would likely do is you'd be able to gain deaths back. I think there would be some technology or something in the dungeon, one or the other, that allows you, if you do it, you gain deaths back. I think any game that has something like this where you're not allowed to die, I mean, Delves has it, right? It's pretty, and I think even the Torghast have it too, so there would probably be a way you can gain deaths back. So I would say that it wouldn't really, like if you have 5 deaths on the first pack, it's not the end of the dungeon, you know what I mean? But you would still have that pressure where if you wipe to the first pack, people are going to quit, you know? It's still going to be the same output. People are going to demand perfection. They're going to suck dick at the game like always. Like these people suck anyway. So when they don't get exactly what they want, they're going to leave. This isn't really going to change any of that. It's just going to change how the game's played, and it's going to open up new problems that you probably aren't expecting there to be in this kind of content. Like, you know, right now everybody's just all about damage, and they kind of throw caution to the wind a lot of times. So if you as a DPS are not gemming full versatility and maybe even gemming stamina in your gear, you know, is that going to be somebody that you want in your key? Like it's going to be a lot harder to tell who's serious about this because if all that matters is survival and that's the only thing that would cost you, like what does it look like? Now I imagine if they did this for serious progression, there would probably still be a leaderboard from time as well. I think they would probably have like a no death run, like a speed run category for this too. Like the MDI might still exist, where you now also have to do it fast as well. And I think that would actually be good, because like I said, right now we basically have both anyway. You have the potential no death run being the cleanest and that being the easiest way to time the run, or you have the situation where you can have some deaths, they eat away at the timer, but you can still succeed with pressuring the limits of DPS. So I don't know, would you want to, because now think about this, right? So now if you're a raider, now you pretty much need totally different gear sets, because like you're not going to put stamina and versatility gems in your gear if you're not going to need that for raid, right? Like so now you're opening up like a totally different PvE element and kind of pathway here that just doesn't really make sense alongside everything else the game offers. So everybody who wants this, I think it's mostly just people who are just kind of scared of timers. And I'm gonna tell you right now, when I first played Final Fantasy VIII, I believe that was Final Fantasy VIII, like the opening sequence has a timer. That shit stressed me the hell out when I was like 13. I hated that game for that reason, and I was really glad to beat that part and never go back to it. I remember losing my save file and having to do it again, and I almost didn't continue the game because of that. I don't like timers. I really don't. I don't like timers at all in the game, and I would prefer that there was no timers in every piece of content I do. but timers are an inevitability because the better you get at something, the more measurable your skill is based on how fast you can clear it. So even in this world, there will be timers. They'll just be a social construct instead of a physical one made by Blizzard. People will still care about the timer, and unfortunately, Raider.io fucked this all up so bad, I wouldn't expect them to not fuck it up again. They would probably make their score based on either maybe the minimum amount of deaths, like you would lose score if you had 14 out of 15 deaths compared to 0 or something, or realistically they would probably also have it based on time. Like I can just see all these things happening. Like this is how the community is, and you're not just going to get away from timers. Like it's not an option. I talked about this in Classic too. Like every time you level a character, you're looking at the timer of it. Like very, very few people are going to level like 10 characters and not think about how fast they do it. Like it just takes so long that you start thinking about how fast you're doing these things. It's inevitable in all gaming that you repeat, and Mythic Plus is the most repeatable content. So I do not think there would be reduced stress. In terms of flexibility, I don't think there would be much because the dungeons would break down to such a basic level that it wouldn't matter. Like there wouldn't be flexibility. So reduced stress would just be new. It would be a new type of stress. It would be reduced in the way that these people who have like intense anxiety about timers would be able to play, but they would still get flamed if they die. Like, let's be serious. Like, if you have intense anxiety about timers, you probably also have bad anxiety about failing in front of other people, right? Like, I think those kind of go hand in hand, and that's probably why you have the anxiety around the timer in the first place, because you're scared to fail and be potentially wasting other people's time. And then the second point they make there is execution and not speed. It would be like you would have to be able to execute well, but you would also have to be fast in that execution. Like, for example, a boss is most, like, even in Mythic Plus right now, the reason some bosses are easy is because people bloodlust them and go nuts and nuke them, right? So if every boss takes 10 minutes, you're going to have deaths. Like, at any 12 or higher key, like, if you fought a boss for 10 minutes, there will be deaths. Like, if they just artificially inflated the health pools, like, you're not going to have a perfect run. It's not a raid boss setting. People are not ready for these bosses like they are in raids. So it's not really going to be about execution as much as you think. It's still going to be about speed, and any dangerous pack is going to have to be nuked, and it's going to have to be killed very, very quickly to a point where your basically whole strategy is just to do things as fast as possible, but not have any time that you are worried about stressing over in between that. Like, okay, so the only real point there is that you can take a break if you need to, like, you need to go fill up your water, or your child or something's barking, or dog, whatever you guys got to do in your real lives, you're able to do that in the middle of the dungeon and people probably won't freak out. But everything combat related is probably more stressful and more dangerous than it was with a timer, especially in low keys. Like, if all we're talking about is low keys, then it is probably way worse. Now, this is something that I wanted to talk about, but I kind of forgot up until right now. What does this look like in low keys? Because as you see in low keys, if you're geared, like if you're 636 and you walk into a 5, that I can solo that with my eyes closed. Like, it's a joke, right? They don't even come close to killing me as a tank. But if you're 606 and you walk into a 5, that shit might kill you very easily, right? So the big difference here then at that point is, like, why would anybody play with anybody who's under geared? We had this conversation when Harry was doing that key. We did that. I'm not going to bring all that up again, but he was able to upgrade these keys with him being under geared. And it was actually like, people were kind of raging about it, but like, he's succeeding. And there's nothing really you can say otherwise. Like, it's just a fact. But if you're in a low key and you're under geared, people are not going to tolerate that, because deaths are all that matter, right? You're now going to be expected to have the best gear possible for your level. Even if it's only a 5, people are probably going to try to expect 620, 630 gear on you. You know what I mean? And health pools. They're going to be measuring health pools and all that. So I don't think Mythic Plus works this way. I just really don't. I don't think it can work. But it's logical. Like I said, it makes sense the way they're describing it and the way it might work, but it just doesn't make sense. And the last point here is a really, really bad one. They're talking about breaking the meta, and it's like, God, did you even fucking read what you wrote? Like, you said currently damage is the primary concern with rigid compositions. And guess what? The rigid compositions are what they are because there's imbalance in the game. And you know what's really actually not as bad as people make it out to be? The imbalance in the game. the imbalance in the game DPS wise, if you look at actual logs, is very minor. It's actually reality is way worse. That like the actual reality is far less severe than people make it out to be. It is mostly a perception thing. And I think a lot of the utility and stuff does get wrapped into this conversation without a lot of people realizing it. Like the top groups aren't going to go with a really bad utility comp, but nobody really thinks about that because all of that you see them do is their damage. And this is even more imbalanced in the way of survival, right? Like I don't know how many people have followed this over the years, but like Shaman has been like a literal joke in terms of survival for years and years and years. And now they're finally in a point where they're actually very good all around, but it's mostly for their damage and their utility. So if you have a high octane DPS spec and they have very bad defensive CDs or very bad like live outlook, like they're going to die a lot by accident, then that spec's dead. Like, you know what I mean? This is actually a worse meta situation. This will carve out a meta severely, whereas currently I think the meta is mostly overblown. Like, you know, the pug meta is actually really bad. Like, it's really kind of twisted from the actual endgame progression meta. But guess what the number one valued spec then is, right? It's Ogvoker again, right? If all you care about is survival, then all these people who are talking about like, well, Ogvoker, it's worth losing 500k overall on one player just so you might be able to survive one mechanic. People literally say this to me constantly on the stream. You guys watch the stream, you know, we pretty much argue about Ogvoker every single stream. There wouldn't even be an argument now. You honestly might even bring 3 Ogvokers. You know what I mean? And then where does that end? Do you bring 2 healers? Do you bring 5 tanks? What does the game look like in a world where damage is not important as much as survival? When timers don't exist, why would you not bring 5 tanks? I don't think it works. I really don't think it works. And it could work if they have serious limitations on what kind of groups you can form, if they have serious limitations on what kind of gear you can wear, how your CDs work, you know, what can be CC'd. I think they would definitely have to do that. You would have to make it so no mobs can be CC'd. I don't think any of it makes sense. I don't think it works at all. So I'd love to hear some people pro for this after you've heard my thoughts on it. Do you feel like these are points that matter? You know, I don't really care. Like one way or the other, I'm going to be doing Mythic Plus. Is this better than Timer? I don't think so. Would I like it? I probably wouldn't not like it. I mean, it's just, I don't think it works. So yeah, let me know what you guys think on this. And I think this would be very interesting to see if they even try it. If they actually test it, we'll be out there testing it. So stay tuned. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are.